In order for me to tell you about this, you're gonna need to know a bit about Clint Rockwell first. Now, I've known him for around 8 years. He was always strange, to say the least, but not in the sense that it made him an outcast. The opposite, actually. I guess strange wasn't the right word. Let's call him exceptional. If I were to give you a quick rundown of his life, it'd look something like this. Straight A's from primary to post-secondary, full rides to Ivy Leagues, and internship offers out the ass just after his undergraduate year. Astonishingly charismatic and handsome. It was to the point where nobody even seemed to be bitter towards him. Not jealous either, they just admired him. But despite all the parties he was invited to, all the attempts at friendship, all the girls that threw themselves at him, he chose to be a loner. In fact, I was one of the only people he ever talked to. Couldn't tell you why he chose me as an acquaintance, he just did. And let me tell you, I was about as average gets, set for a life of the mundane. It all started in 7th grade. I had just failed a geometry test. To be fair, I didn't really study for it, but whatever. Clint was sitting right by me. I saw him take one disaffected glance at his paper before putting it down. He got 100, of course. I guess he saw me staring because he looked down at my paper and chuckled. It was slightly embarrassing, of course, but instead of hurling an insult, he asked me if I had wanted to come over after school and study, and maybe play some video games, and I agreed. That's when I started to get a glimpse into his ideals. You see, he was never satisfied with anything. I remember our conversations regarding what we wanted to do in the future. I had all the generic answers: buy a Lamborghini, a big home in Hollywood, marry Megan Fox. Yeah, I was that asshole. But Clint, he wanted something different. He had bigger aspirations. Adventure, he told me. Going somewhere uncharted, discovering something new, something that nobody's seen. At that time, I didn't know what he meant. What, like Jupiter or some shit? I asked him. He just chuckled. Maybe, something like that. At that time, I couldn't fathom why he would want to go into space. Nothing's up there, I told him. What's the point? He just gave me an amused look, but it wasn't one of contentious superiority. He wasn't like that. He knew that I couldn't have understood, but he didn't fault me for it. Well, think about it. People's lives have become lackluster. When we have all the comforts in the world, everything turns into structure. Routine, nothing new. Our destiny decided by the time we're out of college. Who the hell wants to get caught up in the rat race and just chase monotony day to day? That's the worst possible outcome. Look, that's why we watch movies and read books. Escapism. Looking for stories that are infinitely more satisfying than the one we're living in. I mean, what do we really have to look forward to? He talked a lot like this, but it didn't sound suicidal. It was something else. This guy was beyond driven. I could see it. But to be honest, I couldn't tell you what he did in the long hours he spent in his room alone. He never talked about it. By the time he went off to Caltech and I went to Penn State, we started drifting apart. In fact, after the first year of his master's degree, he stopped talking to me completely. And stopped talking to anybody, actually. When he didn't go home for spring break, his folk called the cops. Apparently, he'd stopped going to class as well. They looked for him, but there were no traces. It was a cold case going nowhere. However, I do remember the last time we had communicated. He'd sent me a Facebook message, and this is all that it said. Do you want to be part of something? It's a project I'm working on. I can explain more later. I'd sent him a message asking about specifics, but he never responded. That was the last I'd heard of him for about 7 years. That was before he knocked on my door in the middle of the night some hours ago. I wasn't going to open up at first. These kinds of stories never end well. However, That's when I heard my name being called by a distantly familiar voice. I couldn't believe my ears. I stared through the peephole that would look like a homeless man. He had dirty, tattered clothes, a mess of a beard, and a generally unkempt appearance, but I recognized those eyes instantly. I recognized that spark. It was Clint. I opened up and greeted him in disbelief, but before I could pelt him with questions, he stopped me. "Look, don't freak out. I'll explain everything. Maybe let me shower first, though." He flashed his award-winning smile at me, though his pearly whites weren't what they used to be. "It's really good to see you, by the way." That's when I got a closer look at his frame. He was bigger than I remembered, bulkier, like he put on 10 pounds of muscle. His model-like face was now weather-beaten and covered in scars. He also smelled of sweat and grime. This was absolutely insane, to say the least. After he washed up and settled into a couch, he laid it all out. I'm gonna tell you what he told me verbatim. Apparently, during the latter half of his undergraduate year, he was approached by his physics professor, Joel Rust, a somewhat eccentric 42-year-old, but he was supposedly brilliant. Rust had chosen Clint specifically to partake in what he called a research project. He laughed when he told me this. "We had to call it that," he said. "If they knew what we were really doing, the funding would have been gone." There were 14 other people involved in this. 2 theoretical physicists, 3 cosmologists, 2 young thrill seekers, 2 ex-Navy SEALs, a discharged U.S. soldier, an archaeologist, a retired MMA fighter, a disgraced entrepreneur, and a suicidal drifter Russ found trying to jump off a bridge. It was a strange group for sure, but we all shared similar ideals, he explained. For one reason or another, we were all looking to get away from this world, looking for another frontier. Apparently, while on vacation, Russ had discovered something peculiar off a remote coast in the South Islands in New Zealand. Something over the Cook Strait. Rust explained that he'd been seeing some kind of strange, thick fog that hung under the clouds. "We didn't really know what he meant by that," Clint stated. "He never really explained it. For years, he'd spend his summers over there and observe it himself. He'd then spend every second of his free time analyzing his observations. Eventually, he'd enlisted the help of some cosmologists and other physicists." And Clint looked at me. It seemed as if he was having trouble holding in a huge grin. "You know what the theory they came to was?" I shook my head. "It was a passage to somewhere else. A different universe, so to speak." This floored me. I was skeptical for about a second, but then I thought about who I was talking to, and how strange this whole situation was. I just kept listening. I asked them how they'd figured that out. "You want the details?" he replied. I thought about it. No, not really, since science was never my strong point. Anyhow, he told me how Rust had started conducting experiments. He'd fly a drone into the fog whenever a storm was brewing. Those were the only times where it was visible. He'd estimated that after it disappeared, there would be about a 3-minute window where he could control it. After that, it was gone forever. "That's why we needed the funding," Clint explained. "This shit was expensive." The culmination of all these experiments and all this research was supposed to be a trip into the fog, just to see what they would find. That's when Russ started forming the team. It took a while, but he eventually gathered together people he deemed would be fit for something like this, along with the other researchers involved. He said that he chose me because of an essay I wrote for class. The topic was about what the universe meant to us as individuals, Clint said. "I guess it spoke to him. I'm sure he had other reasons as well." He smirked to himself. Now, while the ex-military and thrill-seekers were all in good shape, Rust and the researchers weren't. Nobody knew what to expect, really. That's why we had to train. Cardio, strength, agility, the works. Nobody wanted to lag behind, Clint elaborated. After about 3 years, they deemed themselves ready to go. The big day was finally there. On a warm spring day in California, and a particularly choppy one on the South Islands, Rust, Clint, and the rest of the team piled into private planes owned by the entrepreneur. They brought with them months' worth of rations, weapons, first aid kits, and research equipment. And parachutes as well, just in case. Everything you could think of. Funnily enough, the drifter was the only one who knew how to pilot. I remember thinking that this was batshit. Wait, I asked him. So, you guys were just going through with this? Was nobody scared of what could happen? He just chuckled. So, we have a bunch of insane researchers, soldiers scarred by combat, thrill seekers, a suicidal guy. Don't even get me started on myself, and you think we gave a shit? No, I guess we weren't. As it turns out, they figured out what Russ was talking about when they got close to the thing. Apparently, the fog was dark gray, almost black. It was maybe 100 meters below the clouds, and it was massive. The strangest part was that it didn't move at all, and you could clearly tell where it began and where it ended. Everybody braced themselves upon entering. They were suddenly submerged into darkness. Clint said that he could see the silhouettes of anticipation on everyone's face from the cabin lights. After 3 minutes, the plane starts malfunctioning. Here's the screwed up part. Russ never actually told anybody about the drone experiments until afterwards. So when this happened, everybody started freaking out. Nobody was expecting it. But soon after, a wave of light filled the plane. What they saw out the windows was incomprehensible. A dark, foreboding landscape. A heavy rain pounded the windows while a cacophony of lightning bolts struck around them. And to make matters worse, the plane was heading down into a black ocean beneath. As they got closer, they could tell there was definitely movement in the water. Large movements, and they weren't just waves. Luckily for them, the plane was also on a trajectory for a landmass up ahead. Nobody asked any questions. They just stuffed their bags with weapons, rations, and water before hastily strapping on their parachutes. It was at this point where they realized military training would have come in handy. Right then, it was every man for themselves. Once the plane was nearly over the island, everybody started jumping out. A good portion of the team didn't get so lucky. Other than Rust, only one of the researchers survived. And 2 of them couldn't open their parachutes in time. One landed in the water where he was quickly consumed by something, and one got struck by lightning on the way down. The entrepreneur and one of the ex-SEALs also didn't make it, both landing rough on the rocky shoreline. The team was suddenly down to 10. They watched as the plane spiraled out of control into the murky sea. The fog was also still visible in the distance, just hanging there. After they regrouped, they sat in silence for a while. Nobody knew what to think. Russ's theory looked to be right, it seemed. The island itself was pretty similar to tropical ones you would find here on Earth, except for the trees as tall as apartment complexes, and the fact that the sky was always cloudy. They'd later find out that this place had a name, Dusk Blue. Another peculiar thing was that the lightning never seemed to strike land, only the ocean. Good news for them. They started making their way into the jungle in front of them. With nowhere else to go, this is all they could do. Amongst them, they'd managed to take 6 pistols, 4 machetes, an assault rifle, and a shotgun. No reserve ammunition, though. They'd also concluded that they had about 5 days of food and water for all of them. As they made their way across the land, some creepy, unexplainable shit started happening. The MMA fighter, they called him Duke, went to go piss in some bushes at one point. About 30 seconds later, he ran back to the group, freaked out and hyperventilating. Everybody tried asking him what had happened. That's when they looked at the clearing he had come from. Duke was standing right there with a blank expression plastered on his face. but he was also with them. Then, out of nowhere, his copy began sprinting backwards into the woods at a torrid pace. Another occurrence took place when they came across what looked like a void just floating in the air in front of them. It was literally a door-sized black shape that was devoid of anything. One of the thrill seekers, Jeff, stuck his hand into it for a few seconds before pulling it back. He could still move it, but it had become completely numb, and it stayed that way. Apparently, one night they woke up to the sound of shells blasting in the air. Lauren, the archaeologist, was shooting at something just a few meters away from where they were sleeping. And Clint said it was hard to describe. Something along the lines of a massive spider-human hybrid. The shotgun didn't affect it, it just crawled away. God, this sounds like a fucking nightmare. Is that what you wanted? I asked him. I was sincerely curious. I mean, yeah, this is exactly what I needed. His words sounded genuine. I guess it didn't matter that I couldn't understand him. He understood himself. He went on. 3 days passed and they're still in the jungle. They didn't know where they were heading, but nobody wanted to admit that. Rust and the cosmologists continuously record their observations while everybody is getting antsy. They were running out of food. The other thrill seeker, Clint forgot his name, was starting to go delirious. They'd seen a small creature that vaguely resembled a chicken, and he had tried attacking it with a machete. Unfortunately, his throat was instantly slit upon making contact with it. Nobody went near any wildlife after that. It looked like hunting for food was now out of the question. Urgency was settling in. That night, they'd started hearing horrific, unrecognizable sounds all around them. One time, they woke up to see a pale humanoid creature with no facial features sitting cross-legged just a few meters away. Suddenly, the skin on his head peeled back to reveal a singular monstrous eye. It only needed to blink one more time before everybody got the hell out of there. They'd also come across a strange hole in the ground at one point. It was about the size of a basketball. The other ex-SEAL, name also forgotten, walked up to it and took a look. Cautiously, he peered into it. About a minute passes and he still hadn't moved. When people started shouting at him just to leave it, but he'd ignored everything. They tried prying him away, but he didn't budge. He just stayed crouched, eyes blankly transfixed on the hole. After about 10 minutes, they left him. Things were reaching a tipping point once the 5th day came. They were starving, sleep-deprived, and paranoid. With only 4 MREs left for the 8 of them, they needed to conserve energy. However, every time they stopped to rest, they'd hear footsteps behind them. They'd look for the source, but there was nothing visible to be found. The steps would just get louder and louder. Eventually, they'd caught up. Clint said that they could hear something running quick circles around them before he started to feel lightheaded. The last thing that he remembered hearing before passing out was a barrage of shouts coming from somewhere in front of them. None of the voices he recognized. He awoke sometime later, lying on a stiff mattress in a small wood cabin. His head was pounding and his face was covered in dried blood when he touched it. He looked around the room, nearly jumping out of his skin when he saw somebody sharpening some kind of weapon in the corner. But he did look to be human, resembling a Mediterranean man. Upon seeing Clint wake, he'd got up and introduced himself as Slade. He also spoke English, albeit in a strange accent that Clint said he'd never heard before. Now, Clint was no small guy at 6'1", but Slade still towered over him. He'd explained that he was essentially a guard protecting a walled civilization called Pharaoh Locus, where Clint currently was. He described how he and the rest of the team had come into contact with what the locals referred to as stalkers. They'd eventually managed to fend them off before bringing Clint and the rest to safety. They were happy to let them stay, as long as they did fair share of work. He further explained the island that they were on. As it turns out, Dusk Blue was actually one of the few places in the world that had a semblance of order in society. While most of it was still extremely hostile, there were protected settlements set up all around, where people could live in relative peace. However, the main attraction was at the center, a massive self-governing city-state known as Paradise X. While settlements like Pharaoh Locus could be compared to small towns in the Old West, Paradise X was more comparable to a modern-day metropolis. He went on to explain a strange trend in births on the island in which about 1 in 1,000 children were born with enhanced levels of strength, speed, and nearly impenetrable skin. Officials from Paradise X would come around to settlements every now and then in order to recruit these children into the security force set to protect their borders. In exchange, their families would be allowed citizenship and a place to live within the city. Of course, everybody was after this. This resulted in a lot of questionable moral decisions when it came to children. Clint then asked about all the stuff that had happened before they were rescued. All the weird shit. Apparently, Slade just sighed and told him not to worry about it. He didn't have the answers either. That stuff's always been there, and it was better not to think about it. He told him to simply stay inside the settlement and not cause any trouble. The punishment for disorderly conduct was exile. I was still trying to wrap my head around all of this when Clint started yawning. He told me that he was tired and that we could talk in the morning. I tried to get him to stay up and tell me more, but his eyes were already half closed. "I've gone through some messed up shit, man. Just let me rest for a bit. Don't worry, I got more to tell you. Spent 7 years over there, for Christ's sake," he said drowsily. "Yeah, fine. You can take the guest room," I told him. After feeding him some leftover spaghetti, I left him up there. I had to ask him one more thing before he passed out, though. "What about your folks? How the hell are you going to explain this to them?" He paused for a second before speaking. Couldn't if I tried. They're gone, man." To be honest, the lack of emotion in his voice disturbed me a bit. "Oh, shit. I'm sorry," was all I could utter out. He just let out a forced chuckle and said, "What are you sorry for? You didn't do anything," before disappearing into the bedroom. That's when I really thought about what had just happened. If Clint had been telling me the truth, then that's horrifying to think about. I guess I'll write another update when he wakes. So, it's currently morning. I didn't expect to get much sleep last night, and I didn't. We just picked up some breakfast. Clint's been eating like an animal. Guess I can't blame him, though, but I don't want to get off topic. He followed up by describing a rough layout of the world beyond that island. By his account, oceans made up 85% of the surface. There were only 2 continents. Well, there used to be 3, but one was essentially annihilated and made unlivable by a previous world war. There were also islands scattered throughout, ones like Dusk Blue. The 2 remaining continents were known as Neo Civitas and Heaven's Curse. I'll discuss the latter first. Clint estimated that he'd spent around 2 months there, but that's another story. To put it simply, it resembled an apocalyptic shit show, with the vast majority of it being a deserted wasteland. If you thought Dusk Blue sounded bad, this shit was something else entirely, Clint explained. Apparently, the life expectancy for children born there was around 6 human years. The places where people lived ranged from lawless zones controlled by warlords to totalitarian fortresses and everything in between. It had a total population of 17 billion, living in an area about twice the size of Russia, and those were only what we would consider to be humans. The place was also filled with some of the most incomprehensibly horrific things he'd ever seen. Any place that wasn't occupied by a majority of humans was simply referred to as Oblivion. If you went out into those places alone, you weren't gonna last long. Now, the creatures that dwelled within Oblivion were a bit tough to explain. Clint's experiences with them were limited. However, he'd heard that people had stopped trying to label them all. There were simply too many. He told me about some of the more infamous ones. Harbingers. These were giant winged monstrosities with sharp spikes protruding out of every inch of its body. You could barely see their skin, and even the heads were mostly covered. These things were massive, about the size of a large shuttle bus. It was rumored that the spikes coming out of their skin put them in a constant state of agonizing pain. And because of this, they were in a constant state of rage, slaughtering anything that moved. They were called harbingers because whenever one arrived, many others were soon to follow. That meant unavoidable mass-scale death and destruction. These things weren't easy to kill, and people had to prepare. Butcher Knights. Nobody really knows what these are. A theory floating around was that they were members of an ancient order of knights that had been condemned by some otherworldly being. They were now forced to roam heaven's curse for eternity, searching for human flesh to eat. Yeah, they ate people. In appearance, they were 10-foot-tall humanoids covered head to toe in crude black armor, resembling that of a traditional knight. Upon close inspection, it almost seemed as if the armor was welded to their skin, which appeared to be rotting. They'd attack human outposts with extremely large, rusted pikes and axes. If the initial blow didn't kill you, the ensuing infection sure would. Fighting them one-on-one wasn't an option, as it could easily overpower multiple humans at once. Steam cannons had to be used to take them out. Weeping Infernos. These were also humanoid in nature, despite always being covered in fire. They rode on top of unidentifiable creatures. They almost looked like horses, except for the fact that they had 6 legs and ran at ludicrous speeds. It's unclear if the riders are physically attached to the creatures, as they seem to have their own legs, but have never been seen to dismount. The way that they kill is actually not what you'd think. While the constant stream of flames that burst out of their bodies was certainly a cause for concern, a bigger problem was their persistent, ungodly shriek. If you got too close to them, your brain would eventually explode. That's where they got their names from. The Hunter. This was a rare one. People were unsure if there was only one of these or if there were more. This stems from the fact that it only ever appeared by itself. But that didn't mean it was easy to deal with. Supposedly, this thing was seemingly indestructible, until proven otherwise, that is. But so far, nobody's made a dent in it. However, it was only really pursuing one thing: the strongest entity in the surrounding area. Somehow, it could sense them. That meant that the more the settlements would try and protect their most capable fighters, the more people would die when the hunter eventually tried to get them. Eventually, communities would just give them up and hand them over whenever it came around. They'd fight each other and the hunter would always win. Most reports of its appearance may have been falsified, since so little people have actually seen it. However, the most agreed upon one was a being more than triple the size of a butcher knight. It had no legs, but about 12 arms that it used to attack and move. Its hands were large, covered in a caustic liquid, and could grab a human, simultaneously crushing and dissolving them in seconds. It also apparently had no face, just a large mouth filled with sharp black teeth on its torso. Ultimately, these only scratched the surface. The Heaven's Curse was like an ocean, mostly unexplored, and the vast majority of creatures dwelling within it still undiscovered. This was probably good. However, these weren't the only things that the inhabitants had to worry about. There was also a perplexing phenomenon that seemed to plague everybody who lived there. Nobody could explain it away. Nobody could identify the source, and nobody even knew what to call it. They just accepted it. A good parallel for this in our reality would be glitches in the Matrix some people experience. On Heaven's Curse, you could simply be walking around before getting disoriented for a second. When you'd come to your senses, you'd find yourself standing outside the civilization you were just in, out in Oblivion. And people also claimed to see things that weren't there, hear things that didn't have a source, and be having conversations before realizing that there was nobody in front of them. One of the most extreme cases were times where everybody around you would stop in place, have all their heads twist to look directly at you, and then their lips would stretch ear to ear in the most horrific grin you'd ever seen. After a couple of seconds, everything would go back to normal. Nobody would say that they'd even remember doing so. This happened to Clint one time. You may be wondering how there could still be a constant population of 17 billion considering all of this. Well, there was one thing that people living there didn't have to worry about. That was sustenance. Now, Clint admitted that the food they had to eat wasn't very good, but it was abundant. The bark on trees were nutritionally dense. Rain came regularly and didn't have to be boiled to drink. And various, albeit strange-looking root vegetables could be grown almost everywhere, with shortages being unheard of. Additionally, these medium-sized insects called salvatores were rampant all around, but they were never a nuisance, never seemed to spread disease, and if cooked, could be used as a great source of protein. That's why there were so many people. Children were being bred at a torrid rate. Emotional connection to your offspring wasn't really a thing, and the ones that survived the attacks by the Oblivion creatures would be trained to deal with subsequent assaults. Since food wasn't an issue, the more there were, the better chances a settlement would survive. However, the population always seemed to even itself out. The climate was also favorable. While the north and south ends of the continent had extreme temperatures, nobody really lived there. In fact, nobody knows what does live there. And the rest of it could probably be compared to Australia, and pretty hot, but still livable. There were no seasons, and the sky was perpetually covered in what looked like an orange haze, so sunburn wasn't an issue. With that said, everybody still wanted to get the hell out of there. The quality of life was still absolute shit. They all wanted to reach Neo Civitas, which they nicknamed Heaven's Promise. And that was pretty much impossible, given the fact that they were separated by as much ocean as the geography would allow. Now, Clint had never actually been inside Neo Civitas. He'd only heard about it and read descriptions. Supposedly, it was only a tenth of the size of Heaven's Curse, and it was named after the only city on the entire continent. And Clint said that a physical description of the place would be akin to Manhattan on steroids. A mega city that was host to a population of 275 million. There was a continuous stretch of brilliant buildings and skyscrapers that lit up the night. It was also a functioning society. People had jobs, could start families, and could engage in recreational activities. Nobody had to worry about anything beyond shit like taxes and public opinion. It sounded like the rat race all over again, Clint exclaimed. While the area outside the city limits was still somewhat hostile, it was nowhere near the extent of Heaven's Curse, or anywhere else for that matter. Besides, There was a monumental metal-based wall about 400 meters tall surrounding the entire city. There were also heavily armed military personnel called Apex officers guarding it. In fact, a lot of it was comprised of the enhanced soldiers guarding Paradise X. These two places actually had an agreement where a portion of the X-soldiers would be flown from Dusk Blue to Neo Civitas in exchange for firearms. And yeah, they were the only ones who had access to air travel. They were also widely believed to be the sole producers of guns and ammunition. Resources were scarce in this world, and most of them were on Neo Civitas. The few other resource-rich islands around the world were essentially picked dry by recon teams sent by the government. This was that world's only superpower. They called all the shots and went unopposed in doing so. However, there was one thing that they did have to worry about. You see, there was one thing that Neo Civitas had in common with everywhere else. The sky. It was always cloudy. Nobody could come up with a tangible explanation of why. It was always just like that. Well, that's just what most people think, Clint remarked quickly. Strangely, he didn't elaborate on that. That's when I really noticed how weird he'd been acting the whole time he'd been telling me this. There was an increasing urgency in his tone. Anyhow, he went on. Apparently, there was a legend of sorts that had permeated every community all around that world. When the day comes when the clouds finally part, true Armageddon will soon come to fruition, and nobody could stop it. I'd been so caught up in this that I'd forgotten I actually had work that day. My boss had texted me in the morning telling me I had to come in later just for a few hours. I was already late. Shit, I told Clint. Look, I gotta run to work quickly. Just stay here, alright? Don't go anywhere. I'll bring back some pizza or something. He responded almost instantly. Yeah, do what you gotta do. I'll be here. He said this in the same urgent tone he'd been using before. However, I didn't think anything of it. I'm currently at work now, but I can't focus on anything. There were still too many things that Clint had left unexplained. Edit. I just came back and he's gone. I somewhat expected this. It seems that he took a bunch of perishable rations, a few sets of my clothes, a laptop, and some cash. However, I did find something on the kitchen counter. It was an old, crusty journal covered in dirt and bloodstains. There was also a sticky note attached to it. This is what it read. I'm sorry, James. You've always been one of the few people that I could actually bear talking to. Maybe you'll understand eventually. This journal should answer some of the questions that you still have. In the meantime, there's still something I need to do. Bye for now, Clint. P.S. I'll pay you back sometime. You know I will. I smiled at that. It was true. He'd always kept his word. Deep down, I knew that his stay here wasn't gonna last long. He just wasn't that kind of guy. Whatever he's doing, I hope he succeeds. In the meantime, it looks like I'm gonna have some reading to do. Let's see what this is really all about. Hi again. My posts seem to be a bit more sporadic. Work's got me on my heels, you know how it is. As much as I want answers, I also need to eat. Nonetheless, I've started reading the journal. I'll list the names of the people Clint arrived with before I start typing it out. The ones who were still alive at the beginning of the first entry, that is. Just to make it less confusing. There was Clint and Rust, of course, and then Duke, the MMA fighter, Lauren, an archaeologist, Travis, the drifter, Christian, the discharged soldier, Hawkins, cosmologist, Kaganori, thrill seeker. Anyway, here we go. Entry 1. I thought I'd write down my thoughts as well as any significant events while I'm here. Now, I'm not sure who this is for or who's ever going to read it, but I might as well do this. My name is Clint Rockwell, and I'm currently in some strange world that isn't Earth. How'd I get here? Well, that's a bit too much to explain at the moment. We've been on Dusk Blue, the island we first landed on, for around 2 months now. That is assuming time passes the same here as it does on Earth. And I think it does, or close enough anyways. Hawkins estimates that the time between days here is around 23 hours and 48 minutes. I shit you not. The guy sat there and counted the seconds one day. He's pretty much gone crazy at this point. Can't really blame him though, this must be fucking insane for him. Besides that, everybody's been pretty nice around here. All seem to be genuinely good people. Once you get past the cultural differences, that is. Apparently, a handshake here means war. But I don't know. Maybe there's something wrong with me. For the first week, I was amazed by this place. But after that, shit kind of fell into a routine again. The satisfaction that came from making this discovery has been dwindling. It's just day after day of manual labor, eating gruel and sitting around. The thing I didn't realize was that nobody ever goes outside this place unless they deem it to be a direct threat worth intervening in. Hell, the only reason they bothered saving us was because we were leading the stalkers directly to them. There's nothing really to do here. However, the stories I hear from the elders were pretty interesting. For example, some time ago, they found a dead body lying just outside the settlement walls. Not wanting it to stink up the place, some guys carried it away and threw it into some foliage. That night, they heard somebody yelling at around the same place they found the body. When they checked it out, it was the same dead guy from earlier, except he was alive and didn't have a scratch on him. They didn't let him in, obviously. You see, while shit like this would encourage most people to stay within the safer confines of the settlement, it just didn't have the same effect on me. Shit like this made me want to get out there. Made me want to go explore. I realized that we almost died on the way here, but we were also unprepared. With people who know their way around, it could work out. You can't wave a piece of meat in front of a lion and expect it to stay in the cage. Alright, that was dumb as hell and I wish I didn't write that down. But I don't have an eraser right now, so I guess that's staying in. Maybe I'll figure something out. Entry 2. An opportunity arose just now. One of the guards here, Grillo, approached me yesterday. Apparently, a convoy from Paradise X is coming around tomorrow to pick up any enhanced children. Now, there aren't any actually here, but this was his plan. As soon as they came, we would tell them that we had some. We would lead them into one of the cabins and ambush them inside, while somebody else took out the drivers. I asked him how the hell we were going to do that since they had guns. "But we do too," he responded with a toothy grin. That's when I realized we did, didn't we? Apparently, Paradise X goes off the assumption that nobody at any establishment possesses firearms, since gunpowder is pretty much unavailable on the whole island. The only reason Paradise X has them is because of a trade deal they do with some other place or something. Now, I've never done something like this, and I don't know if I really feel comfortable doing so. But this seems like the only way of getting out of here. Still, I'm not killing anybody. Grillo also told me not to tell Slade as it wouldn't go down well with him, because of past incidents. Entry 3. Grillo and I have it worked out. He's got 2 other guards in on this, and I've contacted Duke, Christian, and Kaganori. It didn't take much. They were all itching to get out of here as well. However, Lauren wasn't so sure about it. Maybe she'll come around. Russ said fuck no when I brought it up. And I'm pretty sure Hawkins is actually going insane because he just ignored everything I said. As for Travis, well, he actually seems really happy here. I saw him smile for the first time when a little girl made him a wooden necklace. I'm not gonna bother him. All I know is that this is happening, and no matter the outcome, at least I've done something few others have. Entry 4. I don't know if we could gauge what just happened as a success. Still, I came out of it pretty unscathed. As for my no-kill rule, well, those Paradise X sons of bitches were horrendous. As soon as they arrived in their 3-vehicle convoy, they started causing shit. Some of them started taunting the townsfolk while others swept the cabins. I counted 9 of them in total. I think I hit a boiling point when one of them started groping a woman. That's when everything went to shit. I understood why Grillo was so adamant that we do this now. He was holding in some pent-up rage for sure. When he saw this, he stormed out of the cabin where we were going to hold the ambush and shot the guy down, who really wasn't expecting it. He took out 2 more before rushing back in, sporting a nasty bullet wound on his thigh. I'm not so sure why he was so good at aiming if he'd never held a gun before. What happened next went by quick. In a life or death situation, all reservations you had about morality go out the window. I took shooting lessons as a part of my training beforehand, so I managed to take a few of them out myself. I didn't feel anything when I did so. Things were looking pretty good until Christian blasted one of the soldiers point blank with the shotgun. He barely flinched. He was enhanced. "Fucking hell," I remember Grillo shouting. He had told us that there was no chance in hell they'd send one of them with the convoy, that they were too important. Well, that was bullshit, wasn't it? The guy went on a rampage, picking people up and slamming them on the ground. Every punch that he threw was fatal. Slade had come out at one point to challenge him, but was dismantled easily. I saw him give a look of somber disappointment at Grillo before going limp. The whole plan was going downhill until Rust approached and shouted at the guy. "Come here, you damn pansy," was all that he said. I had no idea what his plan was. That is, until he took out a grenade. I guess he'd been hiding that. He took the pin off and chucked it at the guy and watched as it bounced off of him. I guess Paradise X didn't use grenades, because the guy just scoffed and started towards Rust. At this point, Christian had already been silently gesturing everybody away from the whole situation. The grenade exploded right as the guy was stepping over it. Everything fell silent for a while. That's when we heard groaning. He was still alive, but seemed to be incapacitated. A bunch of guys followed up by tossing him out of the settlement walls. I guess all that commotion had attracted something in the jungle, because we heard screaming soon after. After that, we stayed around to help for a while, rebuilding and tending to any injuries. Least we could do. I had to thank Russ for what he did. The guy really had balls. When I did it, he just looked at me like I was insane. It was a fair judgment in retrospect. "That was reckless, kid," he told me. I just nodded and asked him if he had changed his mind about coming with us. I doubted it, but it was worth a shot. He looked around the village for a second before sighing and shaking his head. Nah, I got some work to do, and I don't think I'd be able to get it done wherever you're going." He patted me on the shoulder before walking away. "Good luck, kid. I hope you find what you're looking for." Now, I don't know why, but that sentence filled me with a sense of melancholy. I guess it got me wondering what that really was. What was I actually after? Maybe I'm not so sure yet, but that was just more reason to go and find out. Before we left, I watched Travis consoling a group of children. I'm really not so sure if us landing on the island did any good for this place. Everybody seems scared now, more than before. Whatever, there's no changing it now. We checked out the vehicles after, and I'm not really sure what kind they were. Guess I wouldn't have known anyways. It sort of resembled an armored, lifted jeep. Eventually, we figured out how to get the thing going. At this point, it was me, Grillo, Christian, Duke, Kaganori, another guard named Novex, and Lauren. She changed her mind. It could have been for a lot of reasons, but she didn't tell me. "Let's just go," was all that she said to me when I inquired about it. We're all following Grillo now. Apparently, he knows where to go. He also stated that he had a plan once we got there, but there was an obvious hint of doubt wavering in his voice when he claimed this. We'll see what happens, I suppose. End of the entry. This is how far I've gotten up to now. I'm not really sure what to make of this, but my perception of Clint Rockwell sure has been dynamic. I don't know what I can make of my friend anymore. I'll post again when I can. Goodbye for now. Hey guys, sorry for the wait. Let's cut to the chase. This is what Clint wrote next. Entry 5. I'm not sure what the hell is going on right now. I'm at the back of the convoy with Lauren and Kaganori, who's at the wheel. We were driving fine. Before we left, Grillo had told us not to look at anything outside the vehicle and especially not to fire off any shots. There was a 90% chance that it wouldn't kill anything anyways. I almost broke that rule when I caught a glimpse of something pressed against the window right beside me. It had pale skin and a wide open mouth that covered half of its face. I just shuddered and ignored it. Everybody else seemed to have the same idea. That was a while ago. However, Grillo just stopped completely and nobody knows why. You see, the road, if you could call it that, is extremely narrow and he's blocking everything in front of us. Hell, maybe he'll get going soon. Being out here at night is pretty horrific. I swear, it's been at least 10 minutes and he still hasn't moved an inch. Kaganori's getting pissed. He wants to go and see what's going on. Lauren's trying to convince him that it won't end well since Grillo hasn't even stepped out, but he seems adamant. To be honest, I'm close to go checking it out myself. Shit. Duke just came out in front of us holding a rifle. He's walking towards something in front of where Grillo stopped. He's yelling at it now, and he sounds pissed. What the hell is going on? Oh, now he's raised the weapon. Grillo just stepped out and tackled him to the ground. They're wrestling now, and Kaganori's run out to see what's going on. I need to know as well. I'll write down what happens later. Entry 6. Well, that was fucked up. I got there just in time to witness Duke putting Grillo in a rear naked choke. While he was gasping for air, Duke got up and started shouting again. Grillo was begging for us to stop him in between labored breaths. That's when I saw what was in front of the vehicle. It was Duke's copy, the one that we'd seen during the first days we landed on the island. Although, maybe it wasn't the same one. Duke was hysterical. What the fuck do you want from me? He screamed at it. His copy just stood there, staring at him blankly, almost taunting him. Don't let him touch it, Grillo shouted at us from behind. I didn't know what to do in that moment, neither did Kaganori. I could see Novex running up from behind us, but he seemed hesitant to do anything. We just remained passive observers. Duke was starting to get close to the thing, very close. It looked as if he was about to throw a punch any second. I turned to see Grillo fishing a pistol out of the vehicle. "What the hell are you doing?" I asked him. He didn't respond. Instead, he just pointed the gun directly at Duke. "Don't fucking do it," he pleaded. Duke just ignored everything. That's when he raised a fist. Grillo got the shot off just in time. Duke's blood splattered everywhere as he fell to the ground. Nobody moved after that. We all just stared in anticipation, waiting for his copy's next move. I saw Kaganori slowly inching his way back to the vehicle. The thing stayed put. It just stared at Duke's body, but its facial expression was different. It almost looked disappointed. That's when its body started changing. It was hard to explain. I just remember it looking surreal. Its skin seemed to be bubbling as it was growing taller. Eventually, it started walking away backward at a speed no human should have been able to move at. As soon as it was out of sight, Willow screamed at us to get back in our vehicles. We obliged. That's where we are now, driving again. Lauren's asking us what happened, but I don't really feel like reliving it. Kaganori hasn't said a word. I'll ask Grillo about it later, I guess. Entry 7. We finally stopped near a clearing. Grillo's gotten out of the vehicle and is signaling for us to do the same. Couldn't tell you how long it's been, but I'm cramping up. I eventually told Lauren what we had seen, but she had no response to it. She's just been staring at her lap. I'm not really sure why we aren't driving anymore, but I definitely see the lights in the distance. We must be going the rest of the way on foot. I'm gonna talk to Grillo now, see what he says. All right, it seems he doesn't know much about it either. He's only been told what to do upon direct encounters with it. Apparently, the number one rule is that you cannot initiate contact with it under any circumstances. As long as you're in its peripheral view, it can imitate your appearance perfectly. It'll also never attack you, given that you don't touch it first or take any action that may harm it, like running it over. You're just supposed to walk away from it. I asked him what was supposed to happen once you've touched it, and his response was short and cryptic. That sets it free. We can't have that. I tried asking him what the hell that was supposed to mean, but he changed the subject. We gotta walk the rest of the way. Can't pull up in the convoy and grab all the weapons. This was disconcerting, to say the least. But it looked like I wasn't getting any further answers out of him, so I just did what he told me to do. We started heading towards the clearing. Through the brush, we could see the outer limits of the city. There was a big wall, looked like stone, spanning the place. There was also a large gate surrounded by guards. I could also see some buildings peeking out from the top. I'd nearly forgotten the sound of everyday city hustle at this point. This was a glimpse back into the old world. That's when Grillo dropped the bomb on us. He had no fucking plan. Apparently, he actually used to be a guard for Paradise X. However, he got kicked out for reporting the rampant misconduct his co-workers participated in. Yeah, it looked like this place was beyond corrupt. The other guards would beat, harass, and rape their way all throughout the city with no accountability, and he got sick of it. He only came here for revenge. He was about to kill as many of them as he could before they stopped him. I never had guns before, he said with a twisted grin. They won't see it coming. Look, Grillo's a good guy, but this is madness. He told us that we could go back, that he wouldn't hold it against us. The problem was, we didn't know how to get back to the settlement. Novex had a similar story to Grillo. He sure as hell wasn't helping us either. So, it looks like we could either try and brave it in this shit show of a jungle or hope for the best in the city. This shit is looking bleak. I'm listening to Grillo and Novex discuss the plan of action right now. Everybody else looks horrified. Kaganori's got his face buried in his hands. Christian is praying near a tree, and I think I saw a tear roll down Lauren's eye. But I seem to feel nothing. In fact, now that I think about it, I'm actually kind of excited. Is this just blatant denial of my situation, or am I actually going insane? Who the hell knows? The best thing I can do right now is focus in on not getting shot. Apparently, they don't use the enhanced guards outside the walls. Again, they were too important. However, it seems like Grillo doesn't always know what he's talking about. All we can do is hope for the best. The plan itself was simple. Novex would put on a Paradise X uniform he took from the convoy and walk towards the guards. If he didn't get immediately shot down, he'd open fire. That's when the rest of us come in. With all the attention on him, we'd take care of the others. After that, we'd use the guards' keys to unlock the gate and wreak further havoc. Now, I'm not planning on simply walking around and slaughtering random guards. I wouldn't last a minute that way. I'll hide somewhere, let it cool off, and explore the city. After that, who knows? It's not like I have much time to think right now anyways. Grillo's counting down already. He's got 9 fingers up. 8, 7, fucking hell. Entry 8. I don't know how I keep getting so lucky. I literally got skinned by 2 bullets, but that was it. I'm hiding behind a dumpster in an alley right now with Christian and Lauren. I don't know where Kaganori is, but I know that Novex was shot dead by the guards as soon as he walked out there. We managed to get the rest of them while they were busy with him. I remember seeing Grillo take a bullet in the shoulder, Kaganori in the thigh, and one destroyed Christian's ear. But this time, Grillo was right. None of those damn super soldiers were there. However, we were also pretty much out of ammo. It didn't take long before we heard shouting coming from inside the walls. After we unlocked the gates, we were met with a large statue of some dude with a hook for a hand. A bunch of civilians started staring down at us as well. Here's the thing. I expected the quality of life in Paradise X to be decent. It looked horrendous. Everybody had bags under their eyes, and their tattered clothes barely hung onto their skinny frames. They all looked like disconnected zombies. The city itself looked like a post-nuclear Gotham. There were tons of skyscrapers, but they were foreboding and dirty. There were destitute buildings lining the place, and every street seemed to be cracked. It was filled with what I assumed to be roving police squads, and the amount of people sleeping on the sidewalks was both astonishing and disturbing at the same time. I swear I saw some dude getting the shit kicked out of him in plain view in front of everybody, and nobody intervened. Not even the police. But that's probably because they were running towards us. However, they didn't have guns, only what looked like batons and knives. That's when Grillo went all out. He emptied the last clip of the rifle into a cluster of police before using it as a melee weapon. He was hurling loud, aggressive expletives at them while he did it. God, he really hated this place, didn't he? I needed to get the hell out of there. The last I saw of Grillo was him getting picked up and tossed into a windshield by an enhanced. I ran away from that whole situation until I was about to pass out. The civilians kept looking at us, but they didn't seem to give a shit. At this point, I still had 3 bullets left. I looked back to see Christian and Lauren not far behind. They also looked to be on the verge of puking. I didn't see where Kaganori went. That's where we are now, hiding behind this filthy dumpster trying to catch our breath. I don't know what we're gonna do next. I don't know what we're gonna do at all. I've killed so many people, but I don't really mind, to be honest. Entry 9. Shit. A couple of cops are walking by us right now. We decided to hide directly in the dumpster just to play it safe. My eyes are watering. Lauren just silently gagged. It smells like nothing I've ever experienced before. I'm not sure what I can do. I have a gun and they don't. I could probably jump out and force them to give up their weapons. Maybe I will. Wait, I just noticed that one of the cops has a tattoo on his forearm. Could it be? Holy shit, it is. It's the Chicago Cubs logo. This motherfucker's from Earth. Entry 10. Some interesting developments have just occurred. Whether they're good or not is left to be decided. I guess my adrenaline was spiked the hell up because I decided to jump out of that dumpster, gun raised. As soon as I did, both cops rushed me. They saw that I was armed for sure, but I guess they didn't care. I shot the guy without the tattoo before being taken down by the other one. I took a couple of baton blows to the ribs before he was restrained by Christian. He groaned, shouting at me in short, guttural bursts. "Kill me, you son of a bitch, I don't care." I told him to calm the hell down, then I laid it all out to him. I told him where we came from, that we were from Earth. His expression seemed to change drastically after that. He was listening intently. "What happened to you, huh? And how'd you get here?" Christian eventually asked. As it turns out, he was a German-American named Clint Steiner. He used to be a part of the 82nd Airborne Division of the U.S. Army. One day, on a mission to Iraq, some strange shit happened. The same shit that happened to us. It was a cloudy day, he explained. 1 second we were up in the air, you know the rest. Only 5 of us actually made it to the island. I was the only one who made it to this place. Apparently, he killed all of the guards who were outside the walls at the time. I was running on fumes. I didn't even know what the hell I was doing. I guess my primal instincts just kicked in. He had also realized that bullets didn't do a whole lot against the jungle creatures, so we still had plenty of ammunition at that point. When the backup came, they wanted to just get rid of him. At first. But then they realized that he could be a valuable asset. They just lost like 10 guards. I guess they thought taking me in and turning me into one of them wasn't so bad of an idea. So that's what they did. Been here ever since. I can't tell you how many times I've thought about offing myself. Nobody should live in a place like this. His voice started quivering. But I always knew something could happen. Now you guys are here. I was a bit taken aback by this. I mean, what the hell was he expecting us to do? So I asked him about it. Well, surely one of you knows how to pilot, right? Unfortunately, I don't. I thought about it. Travis was still back at the settlement. I asked him how that was going to help regardless. He looked around for a bit. That's when we all heard the distant sound of boots stomping on concrete headed our way. Look, come back to my place first. I'll tell you about it right there. So that's where we went. And that's where I am right now. You'd think that somebody as important as law enforcement officers here would get better living conditions. This place was beyond a shithole. It's on the 5th floor of some dilapidated building that feels like it's going down any second. Apparently, Coons only gets an hour of running water a day, and there's no air conditioning. 90% of his meals consisted of these stiff, brown energy bars. He gave us some, and I almost puked when I saw something blinking back at me after I'd taken a bite. But this was his plan. He'd sneak us out of this place and we'd go back to the settlement. Coons knew how to get there in order to pick up Travis, who would steer. Apparently, the controls were similar enough to that of Earth's. After that, we'd go back to Paradise X, break into one of the hangars where they stored the aircrafts, and fly out of there in search of the fog again. In search of the way back, there was about 1 billion things that could go wrong. First of all, there were apparently only 4 small planes in that entire hangar, and it was heavily guarded. But he had a solution to that. He knew about 15 other guards who also wanted out of this place. That should be enough to break into the hangar, Coons stated. Over the years, he had told them about what Earth was like. And it fascinated them. Why they didn't just disregard him as crazy was simple. They were so desperate for something else, anywhere else. Everybody thought about doing it before, but nobody knew how to fly. This would be a golden opportunity for them. I thought about the guards that we had encountered earlier. None of them seemed to care whether they died or not. But there was also Travis. There was no way in hell that he would come with us. He actually seemed to like it here. As crazy as it is, I can't see him willingly going back. And then there was the biggest problem. What if there was no fog to be found? Were we just gonna drift around the sky until our fuel ran out? I ran this by Coons. He sighed. Honestly, anywhere is better than here. If we had to land somewhere else, then so be it. I'm not staying in whatever the hell this place is anymore. His tone was dead serious, expression unwavering. He was 100% committed to this. I told him we'd do it. And Christian and Lauren didn't have any objections. I guess I'd also had my fill of this island. However, I really don't think we're gonna find the fog again. Deep down, I know Coons doesn't either. This is just a coping mechanism for him. This is all he's got. It's currently morning, but we're gonna leave at night. Easier to sneak out that way. I have to say, I'm still excited. I know I shouldn't be, but I am. We aren't going back to Earth. There's no way. Entry 11. It's finally dark out. We're going for it. Coons says there's a hidden tunnel that we can take that'll lead us out. There's also a vehicle waiting for us, which one of the other guards has set up. Entry 12. We're driving back to the settlement now. Fortunately for us, this vehicle has blinds on the passenger windows. I decided that this would be a good time to ask Coons some more questions about Paradise X. As it turns out, this place is more of a combination between a dictatorship and anarchy. There is, technically, someone who runs and has power over everything. They call him the Pioneer. It's ironic because he had absolutely no contribution in discovering the place. Now, this guy, he can make any laws he wants, but he doesn't. He just leaves the cesspool of a city to fester in its own waste. That's right. There were no actual rules against murder or anything for that matter. The only real laws were that you couldn't attack the law enforcement, which was broken on an hourly basis, and that you couldn't step foot in the pioneer's personal property, where he and the ones close to him lived in relative luxury. This was a big deal. The punishment was supposedly worse than death. The only reason he sent out police at all were to monitor for any creatures that leaked past the wall. This wasn't uncommon, apparently. If they saw any, the regular police would notify what was known as the command operatives to come and get rid of them, which was mainly comprised of the enhanced guards. After that, I asked about the copies. I could see him become visibly paler at the mention of them. He didn't know too much about them either. He'd never even seen one. In fact, nobody around him had come to a consensus on what they really were. "Just don't touch them," he said. Simple as that. I asked him what would happen if you did. Maybe he'd have a better answer than Grillo. "Well, you know how they can take your form just by looking at you? The thing is, when it's staring at you, it's merely a hollow shell of yourself. But once you make contact with it, you're essentially giving it permission to become you. And, two of the same person can't exist at once. So after that, you're gone." I still didn't understand what the hell that was supposed to mean. I pressed him for more answers, but he left it at that. Nobody seemed to want to talk about these things. Entry 13. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but then we reached the settlement. It's really hard to say what happened, but a massacre obviously occurred. There were abnormally large claw marks scraped into the sides of the cabins, and bodies were haphazardly scattered everywhere. I tried not to look because there were kids. We searched the place for a while, but we found no survivors. Eventually, Christian went back to praying and Lauren just started bawling. I was horrifically transfixed by the whole scene. I don't know what to think anymore. Eventually, we found Travis's upper body. Safe to say, the plan wasn't going to work. Coons cursed loudly and started pacing. I heard him mumbling. This can't happen. I have to do this. Fuck, I can't stay here." At that point, I echoed his sentiments pretty closely. We really needed to get the hell off of this island, but I never found any trace of Rust. His body wasn't among the dead. I did find his journal, or what was left of it anyways. Most pages were torn apart and the rest was simply indecipherable. I tried analyzing it, but it just read like ramblings from a madman. However, I did find something interesting during the last few entries. He'd scribbled, "This is a terrifying discovery. Before the page was ripped off. Shit. Wonder what the hell that's about. "Let's go." Coons' voice echoed across the destroyed civilization. I asked him what the plan was now. "I'll pilot myself if I have to. I don't give a damn. We're getting out of here." Entry 14. We're driving back to Paradise X now. Christian and Lauren just looked disaffected, empty. Coon said the plane was still on. "It can't be that hard, right?" he said in regards to flying. "Yeah, probably not," I responded. He was obviously delusional at this point, but he seemed unstable and I didn't want to piss him off some more. I really don't know where this is going. Entry 15. It's happening. Coons has gone out and notified everybody who wants in. The numbers actually increased to 22 now, including some civilians. I asked him how the hell we were all supposed to fit. We won't, he responded. Not all of us are gonna make it. They're well aware of that. Well, that's nice to think about. I also asked him what he told them about not having a pilot. He said that he didn't say anything. They probably wouldn't have wanted to help if they knew that. Just say that you're the pilot. Don't worry, you don't have to actually do it if you don't want to. I'll figure it out. He said this with such unwavering confidence. But it was definitely just a facade. I could tell that he had no hope this was going to work, but screw it. There's always a chance. Besides, Dusk Blue really isn't worth staying on. Make sure you use those bullets well. Every shot needs to count now. Entry 16. So, this is what happened. We met up with the other 22 in some shitty warehouse. Coons introduced me as the pilot, or the savior, as he put it. It was really weird, honestly. They all cheered. Coons gave a mini motivational speech about leaving this place and finding a home worth living. This got them all riled up. However, things were looking bleak from the get-go. Amongst us, we had about 7 total bullets. Apparently, some cops like to smuggle weapons, but not many. We started marching through the streets towards the hangar. A bunch of civilians and other cops stared at us in melancholic curiosity as we did so. The hangar soon appeared in front of us. The problem was, there were a lot more guards than we'd expected. I saw everybody's collective faces drop. Afterwards, we learnt that somebody had sold us out in exchange for a week's supply of meat. Yeah, some fucking meat. What Coons never told us was that the hangar was directly on the Pioneer's property. The next moments were a relative blur. The renegade cops charged the hangar with blatant disregard for their own lives. My vision was obstructed by red mist and bodies as I stumbled around. There was no way in hell that I was running into a sea of bullets, so I started scrambling out of there. At some point during the madness, I was clotheslined by some behemoth of a man. I blacked out soon after. I woke up God knows after how much time. I can feel turbulence. Guess we're on a plane. My chest hurts like hell and my legs are shackled to a wall. My weapon is gone, but the journal is still here. Great. I looked around the small space to find about 6 of the other cops or civilians who were there with us. Among them were Coons and Lauren. I guess Christian didn't make it. I called over to Coons and asked him where the hell we were going. As it turns out, we were headed to some kind of prison located on an island called Ghost Hazard. He said it so solemnly. Everybody around here looks defeated, and I'm so tired. Entry 17. I don't know what the hell Coons is trying to do right now. He seems to be trying to unshackle himself. I asked him what his plan was supposed to be, given the fact that we were probably over an ocean right now. He just stared at me with a demented look in his eye. Hell if I know. Can't get locked up there, though. I've heard the stories. Makes Paradise X sound like an actual paradise. Admittedly, those words disturbed me. I hadn't really thought about where we were going. If civilization was so bad here, I can't fathom what the prisons were like. Entry 18. Oh, hell, somebody just came in. He's tossing everybody parachutes. What the hell is happening? Entry 19. This shit, it just keeps escalating. After the guard tossed us the parachutes, he opened the plane doors. A gust of wind hit me in the face as I stared out into the black sky. Coons asked him what the hell was going on. Low on fuel. The guard gave him a twisted smirk. Can't drop you off. You'll have to make your own way there. As he started unshackling everybody, the other two guards soon materialized, rifles trained on us. One of the prisoners tried attacking the guard upon being freed, but was shot quickly. He was barely acknowledged beyond that. If you drop out in the next 30 seconds, you should hit land, the guard said. And I know what you're thinking. You could escape, huh? Well, there's nobody stopping you. But it's a small island, and you don't want to find out what's on it. You get a better shot of survival in the rift. Slightly, though. I'd later learned that the rift was the unofficial name of the prison. The guard shot me one last smug grin before walking up and unceremoniously pushing me out. I'd gotten my parachute on just in time. He didn't give much warning. As I looked up, I saw the other prisoners coming down, one by one. As we descended, I tried to scope out the island, trying to form some expectations. He didn't lie, it was small, about the size of a large shopping mall. There was only one compact concrete structure on the entire landmass. That couldn't be the prison, right? I thought to myself. But there wasn't much time for that. I was coming down fast. I made a judgment and opened the parachute. I eventually landed in shallow water near the shore. I tried taking a second to compose myself, but that's when I heard splashing behind me. I turned around, expecting another prisoner. Instead, I was met with a mass of large, dark tentacles that pierced the water surface, clambering towards me. As I scrambled onto the shore, one of the appendages slammed down just a few inches from me, cracking the land. I made a beeline for the brooding forest in front of me. I'd estimated that I was about a 10-minute walk from the prison. I seriously considered just not going, but then I really thought about it. There was nowhere to fucking go. I jumped at every little sound as I made my way around the dense black woods. At one point, I thought I could hear a baby crying. As I kept listening, the louder it got, the more guttural and demonic it got. I got the hell away from that. Later, I'd put my hand on a tree while catching my breath. That's when I felt it move. I pulled away just in time to see what I thought was just a hole materialize sharp, jagged teeth. About a second later, I looked behind me to see an abnormally large humanoid thing crawling towards me. Its three heads moved in a disturbingly erratic manner. Again, I bolted the hell out of there. Maybe about a minute later, I crashed into somebody. I freaked out at first, because who knew what the hell it was? But then I heard Lauren's voice. She was hysterical. "What the hell is this place?" She spoke softly but frantically. Unfortunately, there was no time to talk. I could still hear that thing crawling towards us. I just pulled her up and told her to run. A while later, we stumbled into a clearing where we started getting shot at. "Stop right there," a booming voice echoed. I looked up to see people wearing some kind of uniform staring at us in front of a building. This was it. A tall, threatening-looking man wearing what looked like a suit of armor started thundering towards us. I braced myself for the worst, but he just moved past. I looked back to see him sprint up to the creature and start strangling it. A horrific sight it was. During the struggle, he called out to the guards. "Prisoners, take him in. You saw the plane. Lazy bastards." We were soon ushered into the dull structure. It looked like a shitty reception lobby. There were a few chairs and tables set up under flickering bulbs. More guards lined the perimeter of the place, with about 1 in 5 being armored. At the front, there was a small desk manned by some dude with one eye and no eye patch. He sighed and started typing. What surprised me was how advanced the monitor looked. Given everything that's happened thus far, I wasn't expecting that. While he did this, the guards searched us for weapons. One of them inspected my journal for a bit, but eventually gave it back to me. They didn't even give us uniforms or anything. After a while, the man behind the desk grunted and signaled towards an elevator to the side. There were about 4 in total. The guards pushed us in. There were too many buttons to count. They just pressed one near the top. The doors creaked shut and we began our descent. After what felt like 10 minutes, the doors opened back up and we were blasted by a cacophony of harsh sounds. Before this, I'd never really thought about what hell would look like. The prison was probably a good enough representation. The architecture was pretty similar to that of Alcatraz, if you've ever seen the interior. There were numerous rows of cells stretching upwards, and then I looked down at what appeared to be a black, endless fissure. It seemed like the deeper it got, the less lights were present. The most horrific screams came from the cells way below us that were nearly submerged into the dark. The guards led us down the raucous corridor. I could see how scared Lauren was, but there really wasn't anything I could do to comfort her. I took a look into the cells that I passed by. Most of the other prisoners looked human. Some I couldn't really tell. At one point, I saw Coons being escorted from the opposite corridor. We made eye contact for a second. His demeanor was a mixture of pissed off and terrified. The guards eventually pushed us into a small room and closed the bars behind us. That's when I took a look around. There were 2 bunk beds, but the sheets looked dirty as hell and were stained crimson. So were the concrete floors. To be honest, I didn't expect much better. I have to say, I did breathe a sigh of relief when I saw a toilet and a small sink. There were 2 other people in there, both men. I guess gender separation wasn't really a thing here. But to be fair, I don't really see how they could accomplish that in a place like this. One of the guys suddenly sat up in the bed. I didn't know what to expect from the people here, so I was ready to take action if he tried to touch Lauren. But he smiled at us, a big, toothy yellow grin. "Hey there, name's Buck Lane." He had a comically stereotypical Australian accent, but he did sound friendly. He walked towards us, hand outstretched. We both shook his hand somewhat hesitantly. I questioned how somebody could be in a place like this and still have any semblance of cheerfulness, and I asked him that. He gave off a dry chuckle. "Well, it's better not to think about it, yeah? Won't do you any good. That's how people go crazy. They think about things too much. I mean, really, what the hell is consciousness even?" He laughed again. Then his expression went a bit more serious. But maybe I'm already there." I didn't really know how to respond to that, so I just nodded. I noticed that the other guy hadn't even acknowledged us. I guess Buck noticed me staring because he chimed in. "Oh, don't worry about him, he's harmless. Gone far off the deep end, though. Look at the shit he writes on the walls." I brought my gaze over to the wall near his bed. Sure enough, it was covered in writing. I saw a few lines like, "Corruption engaged, there is no future," before looking away. He had a mound of pencils lying near his bed. Mine was taken away earlier. I asked him if I could take one, but was met with no response. I took it as a yes. We talked to Buck some more. As it turns out, he was also from Earth. But he didn't seem so surprised when we told him that we were as well. "It's more common than you think." People go missing in planes all the time. Where do you think they'd end up? Here, whatever this place is. Hearing that gave me the chills. For some regular commercial airline passenger going on vacation only to end up here? That must be terrifying. Apparently, Buck was the sole survivor of a crashed plane headed to Amsterdam. Weed and hookers, mate. That's where I thought I was headed. His plane crash landed on what seemed to be a stone desert. He walked for days, eating peanuts before he finally stumbled upon a civilization. They was some strange fuckers. Looked like weird rock people. I can't even describe it. He ended up flipping shit at the sight of them and ran away. Apparently, they took him as a threat for some reason, captured him, and put him into a small cage. He stayed there for days, eating strange bugs they served him before being loaded onto a plane and transported here. If I went to jail on Earth, there'd usually be a reason. Not here, mate. After that, he told us more about the prison. From what he'd gathered, it was pretty much a global clusterfuck of an institution. Individuals were brought here from everywhere. This place was absolutely massive. Ghost Hazard wasn't the only entrance, there were others as well. Also, the more dangerous a prisoner is considered, the closer their cell was to the bottom. This is insane. For food, twice a day, guards would bring around what Buck referred to as nutrition blocks. I'm staring at one right now. It looks terribly similar to the energy bars Coons was eating at Paradise X. Safe to say, I had no appetite. Another similarity to Paradise X stems from the fact that this place was also essentially lawless. As long as you didn't attack the guards, steal food or resources, try to escape, or cause a general large-scale uprising, you had free reign. Nobody had any obligation to step into conflicts that didn't directly affect them. However, this is the part that really sucks. A good portion of the day was to be spent on manual labor. It was a lot of general maintenance work, but most of it was supposed to be spent down in the hole, a large cave system that had been dug through and excavated by prisoners for years. Nobody really knew what the point of it was. A lot of people just assumed that it was for discipline, but there were other theories. "We're digging for something, mate, no doubt about it," Buck exclaimed. One theory was that the warden, the individual who ran this place, was obsessed with finding something called the Neo Grail. Supposedly, during this timeline's history, the original Holy Grail was corrupted by a powerful demonic entity during some kind of Armageddon. That was the reason why this world went to shit. However, the warden believed that this wasn't the end of it. He'd studied various ancient books and scriptures and had come to the conclusion that there was another grail hidden somewhere in the vicinity of the prison. That's why he went about building the place. When the Neo Grail was finally uncovered by a holy man like himself, the world would revert back to peace. But this was only one theory. Some think that the warden has more sinister aspirations, that he's actually trying to start Armageddon. Speaking of the warden, his history is shrouded in enigma. Nobody really knows where the hell he came from. He has a large office on the surface of one of the island entrances, but rarely comes down to the actual prison. There were a few alleged descriptions of his appearance, however. Not so long ago, there was a large insurgence around the lower levels, and people were going insane down there. Eventually, a large enough group was formed to the extent where they decided they were a tangible threat to the guards. They started rioting, working up the levels, trying to get to the surface. Eventually, it was deemed enough of an emergency that the warden needed to be called. This was a big deal. As the story goes, he came down to the lower floors himself, completely unarmed, and took out the insurgency single-handedly. According to the people that saw him, he was extremely tall, maybe around 8'5". He wore a large trench coat with religious symbols stitched all over it. Then there were his eyes. This was contested, but they were allegedly pitch black, lifeless. Along with that, he looked young in appearance despite the fact that he'd been around for a long fucking time. Also, nobody knew where the source of his strength came from. He could pick up a 200-pound man with one arm and throw him aside with ease. Upon being stabbed, the metal of the blade would just break off of his skin. Some people thought he was the devil incarnate. After that, the theory about him being somebody trying to return peace to the world became a lot less popular, especially after what happened next. What lurked at the absolute bottom of the prison was a mystery, with there being no lights down there at all. However, the survivors of the uprising were given a chance to know. Instead of them all being executed, they were given a different punishment. They were lowered by rope into the dark crevice. They screamed like hell, and most of them tried to take their own life. They stayed down there for about a minute before being brought back up. Buck witnessed this firsthand. He said that he could hear indescribable, animalistic sounds emanating from below. It was a horrific sight when they were brought back up. They were deformed, but not in the traditional sense. Some of them had strange-looking limbs growing out of their legs. Some had sprouted eyes on their arms, and some had no semblance of human features at all. I would try escaping, but you can probably see why that's not happening. For the first time, his cheery expression dropped. It's as if he just reminded himself of how bad this situation really was. But I had to know one more thing. How long are we here for? I asked him. I was scared as hell for a response. None of the guards had even said a word to us about this. Buck just sighed. I've never seen anybody leave, mate. Couldn't tell you. But don't worry about it. She'll be all right. There was no confidence in his voice. I know he doesn't believe that. I can hear guards opening up the cell doors next to us. Buck said that it's time to go into the hole. The workday was starting. But here's the thing. There's no way in hell that I'm staying in a place like this. I'll find a way out, even if it kills me.